I walk by the vendor tables and I'm kind of hiding a little bit. I'm like, I'm not trying to insult you guys. There. Uh, the sponsors are great. I'm sure they do everything really well. So, you know. Yeah. Somebody left the phone up here. One minute. All right, everybody, we'll get started here. It's 11 o'clock, and I'm sick of standing up here with a bright orange shirt on. So I did get this shirt printed up yesterday, and it says that your vendors are terrible. And I had to walk by the exhibitors, and I'm not trying to upset them. Our sponsors are great here, but our talk is to talk about why our vendors are terrible, how we can improve their security, and how to get control of them. So I have some subtitles for this talk, and I can't decide on one. It could be that we pay these people to be terrible at security, and they still don't do what we want. Sometimes, you ask for something from them, and they give you screenshots of Windows Defender, and you just think you need to put that in your talk. I don't care about your screenshots of your Windows Defender when I'm asking for a pen test. And I give them a security questionnaire, and they complain about it. I will take bourbon in lieu of them answering that questionnaire. Because that questionnaire is usually not that useful. And then, when something comes up, we have to talk about their Russian operations, because that's a whole nother ballgame. So vendors are unique. Each one is a child, and we're going to talk about that a little bit. So first, the brief about me. I'm Dan. I've been in IT and security for over 20 years, and I used to make cool things, but now I'm mostly GRC, policy, compliance stuff, and I do a lot on third-party risk management. I've been doing this in depth for 4 years, and a little bit longer before that when I didn't really know what I was doing. So the examples in this that I go through, I'm not going to name names, and I just want you to know that I do work at a regional bank that is not sponsoring this presentation, but the examples are not all from our bank. I got other comments and questionnaires from friends and other people that have their vendors. So don't think that all these are my terrible vendors. Some may be, but I wanted to talk about this, my bird friend here. This is a bird that was on my porch. He's a really cool bird, and he was trying to make a nest on my security camera. And I really didn't appreciate him making a nest on my security camera. It's not a Nest Cam. And he was making a huge mess. He was making a mess there. So I had to take down the nest. There were no eggs in it. I checked for that first. I did take down the nest. And then he just kept coming back, and he'd come back and started building it up again with more mud. I'm like, why are you doing this? You need to not build a nest on my security camera. It's a bad place to build. Go build it in a tree somewhere. Trees are more secure. Trees are where you should be, bird. That's where you live. But he disagreed. So he kept trying to come back, and finally I didn't take down that security camera, clean it all up, and they were just upset. Him and his friend, they were just flying around. They didn't know what to do. They're sitting up on my gutter. I'm like, go to a tree. Go find a nice, safe tree. So then I was out of town, and there were some storms back home, and my tree got knocked over in the storms. And I felt really bad, because I was telling this bird, go in the tree. That's where you belong, and now I think this bird is dead. Now, I feel bad, he's out there, and I don't know what to do. But he is exercising good risk management, because he did not build his nest in that tree. He built it on my downspout. So I was absolutely fine with that. And, I'm happy that it all worked out in the end, and my bird friend was okay, and they had a nice little nest of eggs. And I think the nest is still there, but the eggs are, the birds are gone until next year. Just not in the tree. Tree's gone too, So we need to look outside of our nest. We need to look outside of our network. We need to look at everywhere else that our information is going. So that bird knew that there was an issue with building a nest in a tree, and we know that we don't have all our data inside our network anymore. It's going to many, many different vendors out there. So on your network, though, I'm sure you have brilliant employees that know never to click on a phishing link. They are absolutely flawless. You have impenetrable external controls that nobody can get in there under any circumstances. And you have a pristine environment where everything is patched and logged and tracked. And that is your network, and you guys are great at it. But it doesn't help when you give all your most sensitive information to Tito's law firm. Now, this is the first image that came up when I was searching for shady lawyers. I am not saying that Tito is a shady lawyer. Tito, it looks like a good guy, and his dogs trust him, so I trust him. And he is, he's a personal injury lawyer, so probably not someone I would usually work with. But at the same time, I'm going to use him as an example. And, let's just say that our company has been doing business with Tito for the last 20 years. Now, we trusted Tito. 20 years ago, he kept all our files in a paper fireproof cabinet. It was all offline. It was nice and good. But Tito is not stuck in the past. He's gone digital. So he backs up his files regularly to Dropbox. He is a smart assistant who set up a website for him, a nice WordPress site. Hasn't been patched in a couple years. He uploads his case information to an Amazon S3 bucket that his assistant set up for him. It's not secured. He doesn't know any better. So it's just an open bucket. And this is not uncommon for a lot of legal firms. They're small companies with just a few people that are doing these things, and they don't have technology controls or security controls. They don't even have IT staff often. They don't have patch systems. They are dealing in a paper world electronically. And I'm not saying that about all law firms. There are some that have moved on, and there are larger ones that do great work, but there are a lot of small lawyers out there. So, they're increasingly becoming a target. But I mean, this is all fine, right? So last June, I have one example on here, and it was saying that China has stole sensitive information related to naval warfare from computers at a Navy contractor. Apparently, it was unclassified, which makes me feel better, I guess. But this is not an uncommon situation. How many times have you heard about a subcontract breach or a vendor breach? I used to have more examples up here, but I thought, we all know this. We're living this every day. So we know that our information's out there, and it can be taken. So what do we do about it? Why do we keep spending all this money to protect our internal network when we need to protect what's going out? So, when we have things like point-of-sale systems and HVAC contractors that are breaking into our networks or that are just losing our data, we need to focus on, correcting that. So, I know your companies aren't doing a lot of shady shit, and everything you're protecting is important. It's what we do. We all protect our data. We protect our network. We're blue team no matter what the team, all that jazz. But what do you have to protect? That's the first thing you have to think about. What do you have to protect? Again, I work for a bank. We protect customer information. We protect some other financial information. That's easy for us. You got to think, are you protecting trade secrets, IP, system designs, confidential documents, truly critical systems that, maintain quality of life and all that. What do you do about that? Most people, most places, they're giving it to their vendors. They're outsourcing large chunks of that. And then you have to say, okay, now we've given that information out, and we outsource the work, but we can't outsource the risk. So what do we do if it's breached? What do we do if it's breached? I don't know. Supposed to have more on that slide. But anyway, what do we do if it's breached? Are you okay with it? Is your boss okay with it? Is the CEO okay with it? Are your regulators okay with it? Generally, they're not. They're not going to be happy if an external vendor is breached. They're going to hold whoever is responsible for security to the fire, and they're going to come to you and say, how did this happen? So it's our job to fix it, and what can we kind of do? Well, we get into regulations first, because, this is a bill and a regulation, and the bill is so young and naive, and the regulation is telling him how it really works. But there are so many regulations in every industry. Most of us are regulated by something. In finance, we have a lot of regulators. But, you're a public company, you have regulators, you do healthcare, you got regulations, and they all come into play. If you just go and search for the regulation and subcontractor or third party or outsource, you're going to find out some details of what you're supposed to be doing. And the regulators are very basic usually in what they're saying. They don't give you a lot of information, but it's all pretty much the same thing. We just have to know that, you outsource the technology, you outsource the work, but you don't outsource the risk, so they come back to you. So let's try to get it under control. And this is where we're starting. When you figure out what you're protecting, as we talked about before, and which vendors have access to that. So first off, do you have any vendors that have remote access into your network? Of course not. No one would do that. That's stupid. Well, if you do, maybe that's the first place to start. Say who has access to your network that doesn't work for you, and they're the highest risk, so go after them. If you have that, identify what technical controls are in place to keep those vendors secured and maybe keep their information segmented. Next, you want to take all the data leaving out of your network. So, use your systems and tools to identify anything that's going outbound and log that, categorize it in some way. It doesn't have to be anything fancy. You can just put it in a spreadsheet for now if you don't have a system that would manage this. You just have to start cataloging it, and then we can start classifying the risk. Then after that, you've got everything you know what's going out, you know your critical vendors. Now you have to find out what you don't know, because there are going to be more vendors that you don't know about. The money is where the vendors are. They want that. So you go talk to your finance people, your accounting people, and you say, who do we have recurring payments with? Is there anyone that we've sent more than $500 to? And then you look into it. Maybe you can even classify it by how much we're paying them. Because we're paying them more money, they're probably more important. Hopefully, I hope we're not paying them $100 and giving them 30 million records. That increases the risk there. But it's a way to start looking at what you have. So you can find all these vendors by just digging into it. When you get them, you might not know what they do, but that's when you use Google. You just look them up. You say, okay, what do they do? Oh, they're just cleaning services. Well, they do come on site and they root through our garbage. But maybe they're just printing marketing materials, and I really don't care if that gets out to the public because that's where we want it to go. Now, when you have this, you'll find something new on your list. Your list might be getting into the tens, hundreds, or thousands of vendors by now, and you're starting to feel overwhelmed. But you got to kind of categorize it after that. So you combine all your wonderful lists, and again, we're working in Excel, but it's probably not the best thing in the long run, but if you don't have a program right now, this is where you go. You say, okay, maybe these are tech services, these are internal software, these are data sharing, we're actually sending a data file out. Maybe facilities goes back to those cleaning crews. We have administrative support, that could be your auditors and your finance people and your tax preparation and stuff like that. You have on-site vendors that come on site and work with you, contractors, stuff like that. You have to kind of decide these categories for yourself. These are some good ones to start with. But you take that and you kind of work through it. Now, the nice thing about this, if you're in InfoSec, this talk is tailored around InfoSec. There are other aspects of vendor risk. If you're in InfoSec, we are kind of naturally curious, and we like to dig into things. And maybe you're not thinking about digging into this like you would be thinking about digging into a system, but it's the same thing. Your corporate structure is just a system you can hack. So you have to see what goes where, how it works, how things connect and interchange. So when you dig into it, you can kind of figure out what's working and make that educated guess of what's important. And then you get into the boring stuff, but you need it, is the policy. So you're starting up a program, we'll say here, and you may need or want this policy, and the policy needs to cover what you're trying to do, why you're trying to do it, and who's accountable for it. And you need to have somebody accountable for it. If you're just trying to start something in your company that on a small scale that is saying, I'm going to review these vendors, you're not going to have support and you're not going to have power. So when I started doing this, we had a really good third-party risk management program in general. We reviewed vendors really well up front when they came in. The ongoing reviews were maybe a bit lacking. So I kind of tried to build out this policy and this structure saying that, yeah, we're going to be going back to these vendors every year, and we have a right to audit. That's in our contracts. So we're going to keep hammering them each time. So there's always, and the thing about third-party risk and vendor risk, there's always something more you can do. You can start with one section and just look at a questionnaire, and then you can say, I want to go into penetration tests, I want to go into on-site tests, I want to go farther than that. But you have to classify that by the risk of what you're doing and how much it's worth. So if this is your first foray into third-party risk, you take it slow, you bite off what you can chew, but you need someone else higher up, in your organization to handle it with you. So when you get your policy, it's all nice and tidy. You need to have procedures. The procedures say what you're doing. So we're going to be testing security controls of our vendors, and some of them are going to be fine with it. Those are the good vendors. They'll give you a packet of information. They're happy to answer any of your questions. And then most vendors are not happy about this. They don't want to answer your questions unless, you're signing a contract. They will fight you tooth and nail and say, I won't give you that penetration test. I'm not going to give you anything. It's really not uncommon, unfortunately. I love the good vendors, and I spend most of my time with the rest. This is hopefully where your contracts come in. And I didn't say contracts because I had to do the PPP alliteration, because that's just me. I work with a lot of lawyers, and they keep saying papers, everything. I literally work with like 6 lawyers on a regular basis in different areas, and my boss is one. So it's always very interesting and educational for someone who has none of that background. But you should have contract language in your vendor contracts holding them to some sort of standard. The ideal standard is their security needs to be at least the level of your internal security. So then you define what your internal security is, and they have to meet that or exceed it. That way, if something changes internally, you just call them the same thing. You say, hey, we need to do this new thing now. You need to do it too. You need to get a right to audit. So a right to audit allows you to do these questionnaires, and when they come back and say, I'm not going to give that to you, you pull out that right to audit in the contract and say, you have to, or you're in breach of contract. So you can leverage that to get a response. And you need the vendors to notify you in contract whether they outsource your data to a fourth party or if they themselves are breached. We don't want them going to our customers and saying, we're going to notify the customers or notify these other places ahead of time. We want it to come back through us first. So work with your business folks who might own those vendor relationships. Work with your legal teams to get that in there. And it should, if it's not already in contracts, put in any revised contract going forward, and that'll get you going in the future. If you can't do this, you say, I'm just down here and I need someone up here, you need to champion that. And if they don't want to do it, you get them to sign a risk acceptance document. You say, this is all the things that can go wrong when I give this information to this vendor. I'm telling you, I can't do anything about it. These are the things that I can't control. And then they sign off on it. If they know what they're doing and they care, they won't sign that. They'll just give you the power to do it right. If they sign it and they're breached, well, then you can hold up that document and hopefully not get fired. But they're usually more willing to help when you got to put your name on the line. So you talk to them about the risks and you get that to go. Finally, we're done with all this paperwork and it's time to dig up some dirt. So we have a policy and we have procedures and we have soundness, safety and security and soundness, but we need to start working now. So everyone in this room is now an auditor. Congratulations. So you look at your list of vendors and you start breaking them out by risk, and you say, who gives us the biggest heartburn? You take that top 10% and you start working with them. And you say, what do they do for us? Are they an ASP? What type of information do they collect? Where do they store it? Who hosts them? And where does it go? Get a data map of where your data goes outside of your environment. I'm not saying a diagram doesn't need to be overly technical. You just need to say it goes to this region, it goes to AWS, it goes to China, it goes to Russia, it comes back into your network, and it's all corrupted. You just need to know where it goes. So we're going to use that information then to kind of determine what to ask from the vendor. The first thing to ask are questionnaires. Questionnaires are easy for us. They're really terrible for the vendors. These are a few different questionnaires that are out there: the Cloud Security Alliance, the Shared Assessments, SIG. Vendor Security Alliance is a different one. And that the Google VSAC, I don't know if that's really moving much lately, but the other 3 are really good and big and complicated questionnaires. And some of them, like the Cloud Security Alliance, if you're working with a vendor that's part of that, they'll already have their questionnaire filled out. If you're working with a vendor that is in financial systems like that, or a bunch of other industries, they may already have a shared assessment SIG filled out. These things vary from a few hundred questions to thousands of questions. But it's good to take some of these and then bring them back to your environment. I always do recommend using a standard questionnaire, because if you build out your own questionnaire, which you can do, it becomes a management nightmare. These things are updated regularly. You just send it out. Maybe 80% of the questions you don't really care about, but you got to find those ones that you do. So you get those back. You can scope them down for the vendors if you want to be nice, but again, you're paying these people. I don't usually try to be too nice. If you have a GRC tool, a governance, risk, and compliance tool, it may have questionnaires built in. It may utilize some of these questionnaires for its scoring and risk rating. There are some great tools out there that can do that. We've put in one recently that's working really well, and they kind of score and they automate all this. I was assuming this is a new talk in your news section that you're doing, and you're working out of Excel. You want to get to that some sort of system-wide preference where you can manage this. When you do have something like a GRC tool, make sure it's updated. Because if you are not updating it regularly and it doesn't have updated questionnaires, you could be asking for something from 2007, and it seems like a lot has changed in technology since 2007. I still get questionnaires sent back from vendors saying, here's this questionnaire from 2007 that was free back then, and now it's turned into the shared assessments. So shared assessments, I think you can get their questionnaire. It costs like $7,000 a year, or you can become a member. Cloud security is free. Vendor security, I think, is free. And the VSEC is for us geeks who kind of want to dig in and kind of build their own stuff, but it's got some frameworks there. So now your vendors actually return the questionnaire. That's a battle in and of itself. But they eventually do it, usually to some degree of completeness. So you have to basically ask for policies. This gets a little hairy because some vendors will give you everything. They'll just give you a dump of every single policy they have. Technology policy, BCPDR. You have to decide what you want. Some will give you absolutely nothing and say it's all super confidential and internal, and even under an NDA you can't see it. Sometimes you get the middle ground, where you can say you can come on site and see it, and your right to audit. You can, remotely access it over a web meeting, and you can kind of see these the policies. And the reason why we're asking for the policies, the questionnaire will say, do you have a security policy? Do you have an incident response plan? They say yes or no. The policy will tell you what it is, and I don't mean that you need to go through their policy. You don't need to go through and say, this is good, this is bad. You need to say, is this something they just created over lunch? Or is this something they've had in development for years, and they review annually and they renew regularly? Each piece of this is just another piece of information that we can use to scope the quality of a vendor. So policies don't protect you, and questionnaires don't protect you. It's all just stuff that the vendor made up. They could just write all this for you if they really want to make you happy. But when you get these bits of information, it helps you get a more complete picture. So then we get juicier and messier. Certifications are easy. So if a vendor is certified in something, if they are PCI DSS validated, or they have the Cloud Alliance Star certification or something, they can give that to you. They already did the work. Just give you their certificate, and you can say, yes, you actually had someone audit you. That's great. Hopefully they have that. Some of them actually kind of fight you on these two, and I really don't understand that. If they went through the work to have this done, they should be happy to provide it to you. Because the certification then is, it can be great. You can have some great companies go out and assess a vendor, and you can have some terrible ones. But all you do know is that somebody went out and assessed them, and somebody outside their company says that they're kind of doing what they're supposed to be doing on some level. Now, some of these won't give you much detail. If you get an ISO 27000, certification, you get nothing out of it. You just know that somebody went in there. But another piece of information. We get into pen tests. Pen tests are difficult. So if your vendor provides technology services, will they show you their latest formal penetration test under an NDA? The default response is no. Most will over time. And my question to a vendor that says no is, why? We're under an NDA. Your penetration test of your external system that we're using should have those vulnerabilities remediated, or they should be on a plan to be remediated. So you should have no problem showing that to us. And I don't need a copy. You can show it to me online. I just need to know you actually know what you're doing, and you're not just running a Nessus scan. You actually have somebody come in there and doing a proper assessment, because everyone has vulnerabilities. Everyone has vulnerabilities that are going to be patched. No one is perfect, and that's got to be expected. We're not holding our vendors to an expectation of perfection, because nobody will meet it. We are trying to get a measurement of risk and how much this is going to affect us. Yes?
So if you had any of your vendors turn around and say to you, I'll provide this report, but now I want you to answer our questionnaire?
I don't.
You have their data? And
We. So we have partnership agreements where we do that, where it is a two-way contract, where we are receiving their data, they're receiving ours, and there are some requirements. In those cases, yes. Generally, no, because we are purchasing a service, and they are responsible for providing certain levels of that service. Now, we are a service provider in some regards too at our bank, and we do have to provide, these type of responses to them. Our company and the way I run this is a little bit stricter than many that are out there. And I've been told that before, like, this is the most difficult assessment. And the thing is, I know there are people who do more difficult assessments, but I think, we're the troublesome ones, I guess. Yes?
So maybe our VA business associate agreements aren't well written, and they say to the vendor, you don't have a pen test.
Mm-hmm.
Well, what is a pen test?
Yeah.
Everything from NMAP to real.
Yeah.
First of all. Secondly, they come back and they often say, well, you say we have to have them. Who can we hire to do that?
Mm-hmm.
We're a little hesitant from a security perspective because we're not sure that's
Yeah, so the question was about what exactly would be a pen test if the vendor doesn't know, and is that something you would clarify? And also, when the vendor doesn't know what they're doing, who does it, right? So when you're in security, you can kind of get an idea of what a pen test is. You know the difference, but it's kind of hard to explain to a vendor. I say it's got to be a qualified external party that does this for a service, and it has to have the interrogation aspect and the validation. So it's not just a scan where you put a report out there. It has to be validated findings and results with timelines. Again, I don't always get the pen test, but we get something along the lines, and we negotiate over these pen tests a lot. And a lot of times, a smaller vendor may have only something like a scan in 1 year, and we say, okay, we're going to accept this year with the rest of the controls you've given us, but next year we want to have a full pen test done. If that's something that your vendor is not willing to do at all, and you really want it done, you might have to pay for it. It's one of those things. But that's one of those. Do you just go with another vendor, or do you just have it done? It's that determination that's being made. So yeah, so it's a difficult situation because nobody wants to tell you what's wrong with their network. Nobody does. But we all know that everybody has something broken, and hopefully they're fixing it. And that's what we really want to know. They're seeing these issues, they're fixing them in a timely manner, and they're taking care of them. Yes.
Have conversations around the scope of those pen tests because the vendor that's providing you this service
Mm-hmm.
and 500 other services, you're expecting a pen test scope for this service, but when you're asking them for a pen test, maybe they've done one for all of them, but they don't want to be giving information about the other.
I run into that too. So if you have one service that you're purchasing, and then you have other vendors they have many other services, and they don't have something that's tailored to you, or they don't want to give it to you because it covers other things. It's that negotiation. So you say, again, I just want to see what's affecting the systems that I'm running on, so they can redact certain things if they want to. But you still want to know the overall amount of high, medium, low findings and whether they've been corrected, because if something is, depending on how segmented their network is, if something's attacking another system and they're scanning them all together, it could tie right into that same network. A lot of companies have a very flat network where they can have multiple services, and then those services are all kind of, one is breached and then all of them are breached. But some have completely disparate systems and networks where you can have all their locations in Brazil look absolutely terrible, but they're not really connected in any way other than named their locations in the US. So again, it's like a constant negotiation. Every vendor is one of my children, and I need to work with them to actually figure out what works for them. But pen tests are the most you would negotiate with the vendor, and it's going back and forth to kind of say, what are you comfortable with versus what can you give me? And it's a comfort level. If you can't get comfortable, then you have an issue that you have to document. Well, I think I covered everything on my pen test slide for the most part. So that's cool, good discussion. Then we get into outside audits. The SOC 2 Type 2 is in the US, it's kind of a standard audit for services. There are other SOC types also. This is what we usually request, and we get various copies of it that could be good or bad. So this is an external audit report. It will usually say what services are provided, what type of information is being handled, and what the requirements are on us as a business to maintain security controls. So we go through this and we make sure first that the opinion of the auditor isn't qualified. That means the auditor is generally okay with what's going on. The auditor will then note exceptions to their test controls, their test processes. Each exception should have a management response. Usually you don't find a lot wrong because people don't want to give you a SOC report if there's a lot wrong. They pay good money for them, and they want to look reputable. That's kind of what this is. The SOC is actually made for, the SOC 2 is made for internal use, but everyone will give it to you for the most part if you ask, for the most part. You got to make sure it's again within scope of your engagement, because there are many companies out there that'll do a SOC 2 for one of their services, but not for the one you're using, and they might try to pass it off on you. There's also plenty of companies out there that say use cloud providers, and they'll try to pass off a rack space SOC 2 to you because they didn't do one themselves. And that's great. Your data center is secure, but what about everything you're doing to maintain that platform? They don't have that process in place, so you need to work on that. Now, sometimes you get a report, a SOC report, where the vendor argues with the auditor inside the report. And that is the most asinine thing I've ever seen in my life. You paid good money for this to give to your customers, and you're basically calling out the auditor and saying they're an idiot in the report that you paid them to do. So I just get some popcorn and throw up the papers and say, this is a good time, I'll just read it. But there are other sources of information we can also go out to. So this gets a little bit into open source intelligence. How can we look at what a vendor does for us without doing a pen test on them, without actually getting their information? And there's things like, well, you can do Google searches on their reputation. You can do LexisNexis lookups and stuff like that. You can find breaches. You can look into where they have locations and if they've had recent data breaches. You can see where they have IP space. That kind of helps you manage their network. You have these tools out here like these, and they are tailored for vendor risk management. They are, we call them scorecards. They're like credit reports for vendors. They're generally decent. Everyone has tons of false positives, but they're for comparing one vendor to the next, they're kind of useful. They're useful in that regard because you can kind of get a gauge of whether this vendor is good or bad versus everyone else in their industry. But there are false positives on there, and you don't take it as gospel. It's not a straight up validated pen test report, but it's something that they do by going out there and scanning external networks and just checking for certain vulnerabilities and missing patches on a regular basis. So everyone's probably getting scanned by these things and see how it shows up. So you take these tools, you take that open source intelligence, those Google searches, the breaches, and you put it all into context of what this vendor does for you. I mean, hopefully, they don't have much showing up, and they're a good-sized vendor. They don't have many vulnerabilities on here. Their pen test looks clean. They haven't had any data breaches in the news. They haven't had any internal service issues. They answered their questionnaire right, and it's nice and clean. You can wash your hands and go. If not, you got to figure out what to do in the future. So ideally, in the future, we want to get to a continuous monitoring state in third-party risk management. We want to get to the point where we can just have our vendors out there and we get an alert saying there's a new breach of this vendor, there's a new risk here that has to be handled. A lot of companies are working towards that, but it's not really there yet. There are some platforms that do that, but again, kind of early stages. We also want to get to the point where we can really share assessments. So there are those standardized assessments. They're pretty much Excel questionnaires. But there are new third-party risk management platforms that obviously take those in and digest them. And there are some that are out there that can then share that questionnaire with other companies. So that is a risk for our vendors as a service provider, because they need to know who that's shared with. And that is a big concern and a discussion in this space. But there are platforms where they can choose to share that. So they do the questionnaire once and they can share with many people. And at larger companies, you will find that they'll just give you a security packet up front, and this is what they give you, and hopefully it meets your process. If not, there's still some discussion, but usually it covers a good part of it. There's also sharing assessments with others in your industry. That's something that's working on in that shared assessments group. There's vertical strategy groups where you say, well, we are a finance company, there's a whole bunch of other finance companies out there, and we want to try to kind of share some information without sharing actually what platforms we use or what as we use for competition. But there are certain things that everyone knows you use. And again, the standardized assessment processes. So we're trying to get there, not quite there, but that's where we're going. There are tools out there that will, and this is, I honestly, as a vendor side, I think this is kind of insane. There are tools out there where you can put a box in the vendor's network, and it will basically track their patching and report back to you. There's a company that does that, and I know of one healthcare company that says it's really good, but I'm not going to get any of my vendors to do that much. So finally, we get into training the vendors to be better. You know everything about them. You know they have issues because they always do. So you have to decide what's important to you. So I know an organization that considers annual training to be extremely important, and it is important. I don't think it's my top tier, but they consider it to be the most important thing they can look for. So if they don't have a proper annual training awareness program, then that is something they will red flag and say you need to get that done before you continue doing business with us. So they write it up as an issue, they document it, they give it to a report in the vendor, and they put a timeline on it. They'll work with the vendor for that timeline, and they want to get proof. So they'll ask for a training report next year or a copy of the training. Another one is, offshoring might be a big no-no. Say, you have to keep all your operations in the U.S. Don't put your data in another country. If you even consider that, you need to get prior approval. And again, you should really be getting prior approval for any sort of data going to another company, but a country is a whole other thing. And maybe you want more common penetration tests. So you weren't too happy with the penetration test we discussed before, and you say, I want to get these quarterly. Well, a lot of vendors are going to be like, hell no, I'm not going to be doing that quarterly, but maybe you can pay for it if it's really that important. You can have it done. That's something to do. But that is managing that risk versus reward and what is actually useful to you. So it goes back to scoping your questionnaires, saying this is important stuff and this is stuff I need to look at, and this is the stuff that is absolutely critical that cannot be wrong. And that comes into your risk tolerance. So you document the issues. I mean, there are questions, and you have to answer them. But you document the issues. You weigh the pros and cons of the vendor. And can you justify continuing doing business with this vendor? That's the question. Usually it's yes. You got them in there in the first place. They don't usually go downhill that bad. Maybe somebody brought them in off the side of your desk and outside of their desk, and they are kind of bad. And you say, I just really can't do this. So at that point, you hope you have the purse strings, and you can say, we're not paying this vendor until they correct it, or we have to find a new vendor. I mean, you can still ask nicely. You can put timelines on things, but you basically need to work with your internal stakeholders to hold them accountable. If they don't follow up with those timelines, then you escalate again, and if that vendor is breached, you make sure that the business unit accepted that risk. So somebody might say, I still want to keep doing business with this company, that they're doing a service for us that we can't get elsewhere. I know they're not going to provide any answers to our vendor questions, but we really need to use them. So all those risks are documented and signed off on as a business risk that you are now accepting in your business. Because everything in business is about risk. We can only control what we control. There's a certain amount of risk in anything we do. So then you get the call. You say, hey, this is Dave from finance, and our accountant just called and said a hacker put Handsome Bear on our server, and payroll is missing. Can you call him? And Handsome Bear ransomware, I don't know. It was weird. But that's the start of a bad day. So you pick out the good news. First, they called you, and they probably did it in a relatively timely manner, so that's something. Sometimes you might not get noticed for days or weeks or months if there's a vendor breach, And that notice can sometimes be in the form of a generic letter sent through a salesperson to kind of manage the risk. And the rep doesn't have any idea what's going on, so you need to get to the real issue. So, you know, there are all sorts of issues where you might have this vendor breach. And you have, you know, things where you have a vendor out there that uses an unsecured S3 bucket, like the legal firm. Or a law firm that puts all your data in a cloud provider that you knew nothing about because they don't feel comfortable having on their very insecure network. Maybe you get ransomware on a vendor managed server. It's something that can happen. Or the vendor gets malware and then they notify you, you know, pretty much immediately, but don't answer any of the questions or any of your follow-up questions for days or weeks until you can get that final report. You know, you could have a technology vendor that just gets breached in the news. You hear about it in the news and you're like, does this affect me? They may say yes, they may say no, but you really need to get something in writing. And when it's something important, an important vendor like that, you need to get up to like the CISO level or close to it to actually have that conversation. When you have that conversation at that level over a phone call, they are much more likely to discuss with you why this affected you or why this did not affect you, and other than what you get in written letter. And you know, you might not have that documentation then, but at least you have some comfort of how that vendor works. I was talking with a buddy and he was telling me about, you know, how they got notice from a regulator that a fourth party that had their data was breached. And now the regulator has to audit them regularly. And you know, you don't want to hear that from a regulator, you want to hear it from your vendor. You don't want to get it 2 levels down, because now that regulator wants to know everything you did to protect it when it's going out. You know, so all of these breaches, there's the big ones in the news and everyone knows about them. Sometimes there's not a lot that affects you in those. So, you know, like if a credit reporting agency is breached and it affects everyone, maybe that doesn't hit you on a personal level because they kind of handle it. But on the opposite side, if your small vendor is breached, then you become the big name and they have to come after you. So sometimes you have to make an example of the vendor. And so first I assume that your incident response plan covered a breach at a third party. If it didn't, put it in there. Activate your plan, notify internal stakeholders, and basically reach out to the company and say, I want timely updates under our contract. And I mentioned speaking to the CISO, note the timing on this. If this is an active breach that just happened and it affects many, many customers, they got work to do. So you gotta give them some leeway there. But you know, for that follow-up call, when things are kind of maintained, they should be able to do that for you. And again, if necessary, withhold payment. A breach in their service is a breach of contract generally. So withhold payment and until you find out exactly what happened, how it impacted you, and what it's been done to correct it, so how it's been mitigated. And then consult your lawyer. So call up Tito, see how he's doing, see what he thinks about the whole thing. And then you gotta decide if it's time to dump them or have them fix their issues. Sometimes you might have to cover costs to help them fix their issues if they're a smaller vendor. Sometimes, it comes down to the risk tolerance of your organization as everything of whether you want to do this or not. And breaches happen. They're always going to happen. They're going to happen to everyone. We can't stop them, but we need to be able to know how to maintain and manage it. When it's all done, you fix the process. Your incident response plan didn't really maybe your incident response plan didn't accommodate a vendor that would only provide vague sentences to you, not give you details. Maybe you need more controls in your contracts, you need more insurance coverage, stricter reviews of your vendors, or maybe you just need a new vendor. That's the final solution. So there's always lessons to be learned, and in the end of all this, you still work here. Congratulations, you made it through that. You weathered the storm of the vendor breach, and you got the executives on board with a strong third-party risk management platform and program, and you know, they give you a whole staff to work on this with you. It's great. And you know, now you control the purse strings for the organization, and the whole company is revolving around what you do, and you're in charge, and you need to basically authorize that vendor before they even sign the contract, and you're the hero. And hopefully that's the way it goes for everyone in here, because you don't want to be the one that's on the line when they come yelling at you and you got no power. So thank you all for your time. If you got questions, I'd love to talk about vendor breaches and vendor attacks and just what you can do, reach out to me. I want more examples in future slides, and you can keep them anonymous. So just tell me what you do and what your vendors do and how terrible they are. And then come to our conference in Omaha next year, first year conference. So it's going to be fun. All right. Any questions? So, thanks. Thank you.